Welcome back to the Theology of the Buddy podcast, episode 33. What importance does imagination have for us as Catholics? Is it moral to play role-playing games? In this episode, we consider this topic as we talk about Dungeons and Dragons and other works of fantasy. We hope you enjoy.
Allow me to tell you, fellow adventurers, about the land of Halos, a world of mystery, a world where only, and without exceptions, the virtuous are heroic. In the world of Halos, one must be exemplary as a hero to be given strength to carry on in a land sought out by foes of various kinds. Rise up with heroes. Serve Saren as a protector of people. Do as you ought. So what I've just described for you is kind of that catch into a Dungeons and Dragons campaign that I run for my husband, Mike.
That's me.
That's Mac.
Yes, today we're talking about Catholics, role-playing games, Dungeons and Dragons, goodness, evil,
the importance of imagination,
storytelling, and why certain role-playing games have bad raps and why they deserve it, and why they don't in some cases, and how we should do things as Catholics, I think.
That's awesome.
Does that about sum it up?
Yeah. There's a, I don't know if it was one of the prayer books we have, Chris, but one of the, sins that it has listed in there is playing role-playing games like Dungeons and Dragons.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's pretty common.
It is common.
You see it a lot of places.
Yeah.
Yeah, there is those preconceived notions about Dungeons and Dragons, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
Especially in traditional
And some of it's based on reality.
Yes.
'Cause let's get into it, right? You see a lot of association between Dungeons and Dragons and things like Satanism, the occult. You hear things like people who've been involved in the occult and doing sketchy occult stuff during D&D, and exorcists being involved and stuff like that. And yeah, it's pretty scary. You can kind of understand why people are just don't go near role-playing games. It's dangerous.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right?
Why is that?
I think it's a lot of it is on the content of Dungeons and Dragons, published stories and stuff like that. And just the fact that imagination and role-playing can be such a powerful tool for good or ill,
Well, and some people would think, because it's a game or they're doing, their character is participating in something that's just part of the game, that it isn't necessarily dangerous or wrong, which is not true. If I have a character that, I don't know, decides to participate in something bad, like a human sacrifice or makes a deal with a demon or whatever, that ain't right.
Yeah, and this is, the kind of content that has actually existed in published D&D campaigns, published by the actual writers of Dungeons and Dragons, and stuff that has real spiritual impact on people.
Now, I've got a quick question. So why would we have such an issue with Dungeons and Dragons, for example, but then you've got actors and actresses that like even Shakespeare had very bad actors in his plays and things like this. Like, what's the difference here, and why is one being told, like, why is Dungeons and Dragons being condemned, and you don't really hear a lot of condemnation for actors who play villains, for example. Do you have any thoughts on that?
I kind of wonder if there's something to do with the use of performance that maybe kind of separates things a little bit, using a play as a means of narration to tell a story. Whereas in Dungeons and Dragons, it's a player making their own decision to potentially do wrongful play.
I think it's all in how you portray a villain, right?
Yeah.
Like, it could be, I mean, let's say we're playing Dungeons and Dragons, the four of us, and I'm the dungeon master and you guys are heroes, and I like portray an evil villain for you guys to fight. That's a lot different from you guys as the player saying, we're going to be bad guys and we're going to go summon demons and worship demons and it's going to be cool. Mm-hmm. That's really different. And I think that same distinction exists in film too.
Yeah.
Right? Like, there's a big difference between a movie like, say, Lord of the Rings, where there's this demonic Balrog or a demonic guy named Sauron that they need to defeat in the end. There's a big difference between that kind of thing where a demon or a villain is portrayed, but in a proper context that shows what it is and how a good person relates to it, etc. Versus, say, a movie like Maleficent or Bayonetta or something like that, where like the witch or the demon is the hero that we're supposed to...
Hero in quotation.
Yeah. the relatable character. Mm-hmm. That kind of thing is dangerous in film too. Like if you're Angelina Jolie and you're playing a witch and, glorifying the occult in that role, I think that's very similar.
Mm-hmm. Think about a story like Paradise Lost. That was arguably one of the more well-known fictitious stories where Lucifer is portrayed as a character that's handsome, that is desirable, that is very much trying to manipulate the reader into thinking they can empathize with that kind of character.
Seen as somewhat noble.
Yeah, yeah. I think the biggest misuse of the game of D&D, or one of them anyway, is when a player finds pleasure or enjoyment in doing wrong things. So, if a player is just like, I can play as bad as I want and kill evil people and, mess around with demonic things, or, be a necromancer and, make it look so cool and I'm so awesome, or maybe even partaking in behaviors that are like, I don't know, scandalous or whatnot, then that's obviously a problem. You know what I mean? Like, yeah. They're not taking pleasure from being a hero and doing the right thing. They're finding enjoyment and pleasure in doing sinful things where they think it has no consequences simply because it's a narration, it's a narrative, or it's a game.
Thing is, I think too, like, it's not restricted just to D&D.
Oh yeah.
I mean, obviously in this podcast, our topic is on D&D, but you could do this with any game, video games, etc. Yeah.
Yeah, different games allow for it and encourage it to different degrees. And that's, to step forward a bit, I guess, is one of the legitimate flaws with D&D. So a lot of the published material, it has some messed up content like that. Mm-hmm. Like they just recently published a campaign called Descent into Avernus, which is like basically a hell-like parallel universe in D&D. And from what I've heard, it essentially involves the party being hired by the powers of hell for various purposes in their internal struggle against each other, which is pretty freaking messed up. Yeah. And there's a lot of stuff like that. There's also kind of the more subtle agendas of companies involved. And this is a big thing with, I'd say, the big two fantasy role-playing companies, Wizards of the Coast and Paizo, which makes Pathfinder. They're both enormous LGBT promoters, both in like social media and also in their content. Like they will, put into their towns same-sex couples and stuff like that, just to kind of subtly move the Overton window on that kind of thing, right?
Yeah, the thing that is interesting, right, with Dungeons and Dragons is kind of that, coming back to that thing we talked about in season 1, where we talked about the principle of the integral good, right? Mm-hmm. So, I mean, the question that I have with, when it comes to dealing with this stuff, and like I can remember even our conversations back in the day, because we've obviously played a bunch of Dungeons and Dragons since then, but I mean, back in the day, my objection really was like, is this going to be a problem spiritually? Like what? Mm-hmm. Like I had already gone into it with those kind of preconceived notions. But yeah, I mean, the thing that has been kind of cool with both you and Mike in your own versions of Dungeons and Dragons has been that it rewards virtue instead of vice.
Yeah. If you're bad in my campaign, you're going to pay for it.
Yeah. Yeah. And, but yeah, like we were talking with the principle of the integral good, like even in acting, you can pretend to shoot somebody and it's not, it's fake, right? It's not really real. But I mean, you can't fake blasphemy, for example, right? Mm-hmm. And you certainly can't fake summoning demons. If you're calling them and whatnot, they're probably going to
They kick the door down and they run in.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So, I mean, yeah, you've got to be very careful with what you do. But what would you say to a Catholic who, or just someone of goodwill who feels like it could lead them down into that path of, playing with those things? Like, how do you avoid it? I guess is my question. Like, hey, I'm looking to get into Dungeons and Dragons, but what you're saying is like, you're going to find it in the content that you get from Wizards of the Coast. So how do you know what to get or what to do? Or, like, do you really want to support these guys? Or, you know what I mean?
I honestly think the biggest way to avoid that is do homebrew. Mm-hmm. Do homebrew. You're basically using the mechanic that they've made up, right? So the mechanic of, the dice and setting up a character and, monster stats or whatever. You can even find ones that people have made themselves. You could, like, in theory, you could technically make your.
Yeah. I really think it's a good idea to limit support for these companies too. Like, yeah. I really empathize with that point.
And playing with like-minded people. really helps too. Like, you know, you're your brother's keeper. If you're going to play D&D, don't play with people that likely are going to.
I'll come back to the financial support thing in a moment, but yeah, let's focus on that for a second.
Yeah.
The making a positive environment for role playing. I mean, it doesn't have to be Dungeons and Dragons. There are lots of role playing games out there.
Yeah.
Especially recently in the past like 10 years or so.
People like
a whole lot of smaller companies and people have put out role-playing games that are accessible and easy. There's ones you can get for free. There's also free versions of Dungeons and Dragons that have like the basic rules, so you can use that and not support Wizards of the Coast.
And don't be a necromancer. Yeah. Makes a big difference.
It's common sense. A lot of it falls on whoever's running the story, like the dungeon master, right?
Yeah.
You need someone in that role who knows who you can trust not to run a sketchy story.
Yeah.
So, like, yeah, I'd be a bit careful with joining a game with someone who's not like a morally upstanding person in that position, right?
You can come play with us. I'm always looking for people. It's like my first question is, do they play D&D or would they play D&D with us?
Yeah. I've thought a lot like about actually publishing a role-playing game system from the ground up that was built without any of this sketchy crap in it. I really think it's a project that a Catholic needs to do.
Yeah.
What are you waiting for?
Yeah, man.
Yeah,
do it.
It's a thing I've been putting ideas for in
dude, make it happen.
Like making notes on it, but
Kickstarter. Kickstarter. Support Mike.
It takes some serious work to actually make it a real boy.
Yeah.
But you know, I know there are other people other than me thinking the same thing, right? Like, and this is a thing that's happening in other forms of media too. Like, I've been seeing on Twitter, there are a bunch of Catholics that are starting to, that are like writing fantasy novels and sci-fi and stuff like that. And there's a community kind of based around like, let's take back some of this stuff from the culture and make like good content that's free of all this stuff.
I think a lot of people are appealed to Dungeons and Dragons is because there is such a desire for a means of engaging our imaginations. Unfortunately, a lot of people will misuse that and play wrongly. But, you know, as humans, I think having an imagination is part of who we are as creative beings.
Yeah, and that kind of gets into the good here, right?
Yeah.
Like engaging the imagination, engaging in storytelling, and kind of seeing the to use a kind of Chesterton type term to see the like magic in life, as you would kind of say. It's where the good side of role-playing gets in that kind of makes it something that's worth doing, something that's worth like digging, like the kind of diamond in the rough with all these issues with certain role-playing games. I was reading in, I think it's Orthodoxy, where Chesterton talks about how when we first discover something about the world, we see it as magical. Things like, you know, a fairy story about a river running with gold is one of the analogies he uses. And, you know, it's an amazing idea, a river running with gold. But really what it recaptures is our natural awe and wonder at first seeing a river running with water. That kind of thing. Kind of, I think it's important to kind of awaken us to the goodness of things in the world and kind of expand our perspective on things.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Humans learn through storytelling, and like it's one of the best ways we learn things like morals and virtue.
True.
I think. So we should get some Penny thoughts in here.
Yeah, like what are your thoughts? Like, you kind of came into this without any, like, into our D&D world without any really experience in it before. You had never played it?
Yeah, but I mean, I had kind of had the experience of like board gaming. So playing things like Defenders of the Realm, you know,
right.
Those kind of fantasy games. So I was already kind of predisposed to those kinds of stories. So and again, it took having a moral DM, like Mike, to basically
Convince
make me feel
us.
safe enough to be like, okay, I'll
Yeah.
play this. You know, I don't know, like,
I'd heard a lot about the concerns about D&D.
Yeah.
Which I knew were valid, but
Oh, absolutely,
Yeah.
they are. Yeah.
I think it definitely, like Chris is saying, like, until it was like, okay, yeah, moral dungeon master. We'll give it a shot. See how it is.
When you have a moral moral storyteller,
Ave Maristella.
got Mary on the brain. Yeah, like when you have a moral storyteller, you're not exactly gonna worry that much about the material.
no.
Like,
Well, exactly.
You know, picking up a book by C.S. Lewis versus picking up a book by Game of Thrones author or something like that. Which fantasy book is more likely to contain bad?
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
That's kind of a good analogy too. Like,
Don't ask the guys from Catching Foxes, though. They'll answer incorrectly.
Yeah. They'll answer anything by von Balthasar. That's a good fantasy novel.
that's too
And I mean-
fantastical for me.
Yeah.
I know. Reasonable Hope. That is
Empty
really-
Hell, yeah, that's beyond fantasy.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I mean, if somebody picks up, 50 Shades of Grey and compares it to, I don't know, a good book, which one is going to have bad stuff in it?
Right.
So I do think it's a good analogy. Like, when you can feel safe reading Tolkien,
Yeah.
but if you go to a bookstore and you see random fantasy author name I don't recognize, here's a story with wizards and dragons and magic. Is this going to be weird and occult, or is it going to be like traditional Tolkien-esque Christian fantasy?
Well, I mean, like when I was growing up, I remember, reading all of the Chronicles of Narnia. I remember reading, a bunch of other fantasy books. I was mostly a Goosebumps kid, but I remember finding this really interesting sounding fantasy book. And, I didn't know any better. I didn't think anyone would write sketchy material. And if they would, you would know just by reading the back of the book. But sure enough, there was pornography in it. And I was in grade 6 and I didn't understand what was happening.
In
in
which
grade
book?
6. Pardon me?
In which
book?
Like it was in Goosebumps?
No, not in Goosebumps.
Oh,
I was more of a
fantasy.
Goosebumps. No, it was a fantasy book that I had picked up.
Oh.
I don't even remember what it was called, but I had picked up a fantasy book because the back of it sounded amazing. It sounded really appealing to, what would have been, 12? Something like that.
11 or 12.
11 or 12. But yeah, it's all about who's writing the story.
Yeah, I've definitely had similar experiences with fantasy novels.
Yeah.
Yikes.
Sorry, go ahead, Chris.
I was going to say, one of the hard things, though, that I find, and I think you guys can probably relate to this too, is that, I found that especially as I've kind of dug my heels further and further into traditionalism, that it's become incredibly more difficult to consume media, secular media. And I don't know if it's just because evil is increasing in the world, or in media, or if it's just my sensitivity to it. But like I'm become, obviously more and more aware of things like blasphemy, and, Julie and I will start watching a show, and as soon as there's a blasphemy, before we used to just kind of, bow our heads, but now we find that our heads are bowing half of the show, and so we had to give up so many shows that we were somewhat enjoying the story of, because there is these bad elements. And, like what I find difficult though is that you can't go to the Christian side of things and find a lot of really great stories, especially right now. I mean, look at the things like Pure Flix, God's Not Dead, things like that.
Yeah.
God's Not Dead 2.
Or even things like Vid Angel, where they try and be like, you can watch Game of Thrones, but we took all the sex and bad stuff out of it. Yeah, but you're still watching Game of Thrones. I'm sorry to anybody. Actually, I'm not sorry. I'm not sorry. We cannot justify material that still has that bad content in it. That is morally problematic.
Yep.
You know what I mean?
Yep.
And you can't just think, well, because the bad stuff isn't in it, I'm no longer supporting it.
Also, what is there, like 5 minutes left?
Yeah, all I'm watching are the credits. Like, come on. But you're still giving your support to those titles.
Yeah.
Like there's no gray area there.
Yeah.
And you're right. Like Christian movies often aren't that great, or at least I haven't had amazing experiences with good stories. And I'm kind of a film snob, so when I watch like a really badly done Christian movie, I'm just like, do you know how to write?
It's hard to call it art, like, honestly.
Yeah.
And I mean,
it's so hard to stomach watching.
It's kind of bad when, like, you have to look at things like, like the movie Unplanned, for example. Mm-hmm. I mean, her life is very inspiring, and Abby Johnson is a really sweet lady.
I love her. Yeah.
But I mean, in terms of a movie, I couldn't call that entertainment. I mean, it's
no,
and it was
pretty well done.
It was
like
well
compared
done.
to what we've seen.
But I mean, it was still like, in terms of Christian movies, it was probably one of the better ones, but it wasn't like, oh my gosh, like, yeah.
I mean, you can have movies that, like, sometimes it's hard to call them entertainment if it's a very serious premise, like, but they can be incredible works of art. Like, look at Schindler's List or something, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
You don't watch that for entertainment per se.
Yeah.
And yet it's one of the greatest movies ever made, right?
I think, and I've said this to Mike before, I think culturally, we no longer know how to tell a good story. And cinema is the greatest example of that. I mean, books too. It's hard to find good authors that write amazing epics, except for, a handful, which Mike probably could name a few. And I mean, with cinema, considering how many movies are pumped out in a year, most of them are derived from pre-existing material, or they are sequels, or they are based on true stories, which is based off of a book, which is based off of, I don't know, it's a remake or something. We've lost the art of being able to tell a good story, to engage our imaginations in ways that strike awe and wonder into listeners. Like, if grandpa is sitting down with their, grandson and tells them an epic tale about a knight and a dragon, a kid's eyes would light up. But now it's just like, I don't know.
And this is an important loss that I think goes hand in hand with the moral decline of our society, right? Mm-hmm. Like I was saying earlier, we learn so much about virtue through storytelling. Mm-hmm. And if we don't know how to tell stories in a compelling way anymore, that means the generation that's growing up consuming these banal at best and like corrupting and evil at worst stories is going to bear the wounds of that. Mm-hmm. And so it's something we can't ignore. And I think we also can't take a Benedict option type approach of like just ignoring all the media. Mm-hmm. I think we have to, in some sense, reclaim this art of storytelling. Mm-hmm. Otherwise, we're allowing that cultural rot to continue, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I was listening tonight, Alexander Shugel, the guy who punched the Pachamamas off the bridge in Rome. Mm-hmm. He was doing he was giving a talk and like a little, what appeared to be like a patio or something in Texas today. Yes. And somebody was on Instagram, videotaping it. And one of the things that he was saying was with regards to Europe, right? Europe is a place where there has been Christian civilization and they have, forgotten it, but we should not let it just completely burn and rebuild anew. We need to take back what is ours and make it Catholic again, essentially. Yeah. Right. Mm-hmm. And, but the thing is, like, I was thinking about with regards to, like you were saying, with different forms of media, and whatnot, I would say one of the biggest losses that we've had is the fact that we've given up on having a hero. That, if we don't have a strong understanding of a hero, don't start singing the song, Mike. But if we don't have a strong understanding of what hero is and what heroism is, a story falls apart. So the idea of magnanimity, and the importance of virtue, these are the things that capture the imagination and inspire us towards the good, the true. And it's kind of funny too, cause, when you would watch, say, for example, even the old Star Wars movies, the idea of who the hero was a lot clearer than what it is today. And I think Absolutely. That's part of the reason why people hate the new ones so much, is because the heroes aren't heroes anymore.
And I was just about to say, cinema has tried so hard to make these heroes relatable.
Yeah, make them gritty and realistic.
Yeah. Be like, look at all these faults that all these heroes have. All of a sudden, don't you feel like a hero? But here's the thing about a hero. A hero isn't this ideal that stoops down to us. To have the idea of a hero is something that we have to strive to rise up to become.
Yeah.
So when you downplay a hero and try and make them so much like us, all of a sudden they're not that heroic anymore. Do you know what does that make sense?
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, they're just like a regular guy that, they did this good thing, so they must really be something.
You can be a hero too by helping others.
Or like, I'm a scumbag, I'm Iron Man, but I'm still a hero because I've got a metal suit.
Yeah.
And that doesn't mean, everyday people can't do good things, obviously. But in the narrative, the hero has to be somebody that, you know, I don't want to say
heroic.
Is heroic. I don't want to say is the Superman, because I really don't like Superman. But, you know, I don't want to say is almost this unattainable goodness.
Mm.
You know what I mean? That you have to strive to become, that you're constantly working at to become.
Well, there's that need for altruism, right? Like a hero is altruistic, and I think that, and I think it all points down to the incarnation.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
I mean, that's the ultimate hero story, and from which all real good hero stories takes its.
Yeah. Think about one of the most intimidating challenges ever presented. Be perfect as your heavenly Father is perfect. Man up.
Yep.
You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I mean, even when you think about people like Teresa of Avila, yes, I'm going to quote a Carmelite again. You know, her famous work, The Way of Perfection, you know, and it was not written as an instruction manual for Mike playing against me in Halo. It was,
I don't need one.
No,
already achieved perfection there.
Write it?
Yeah, I thought he did write that for sure.
But you know what I mean? Like it was, it's amazing too, because if you read The Way of Perfection, she spends a lot of time pointing out her own faults, but still calling herself and her sisters to the higher way of life, the higher interior life. And that was the way of virtue.
Yep.
You know?
Yeah.
And, you know, all the other particular graces that one receives flow from starting at a place of growing in regular, good, you know, virtue.
Yeah.
So can I interject and give a shout out? Because this is like the perfect place to segue it in, right?
Sure.
We were talking about Catholics creating good content.
Yes.
And there's actually a company, and I might have to look it up and put it in the show notes. I think it's called Cloven Pine Games, and it's run by, there was I forget the name, but it was a famous like atheist blogger who converted, and her husband runs this company.
Yeah. Really?
She was.
I know who you're talking about. I can envision her in my mind. Yeah.
He runs this game, and they are making a role-playing game about nuns in a convent.
Cool.
Wow.
Don't make a habit of that game.
Oh.
Just kidding. You should.
Yeah. So shout out to them. It's an awesome idea.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And you guys are doing the thing that I think more people need to do. And while I'm doing shout outs, Mr. Shugo, we love you. And speaking of that event with the Dunker, that was set up by Taylor Marshall.
Yes, it was.
Taylor Marshall's also like been part of this movement with his historical fiction series.
Uh-huh.
Yeah. It's really not fantasy, it's historical fiction, but it's his retelling of St. George and the Dragon, and kind of following the character of Georgios through the lead up to the Diocletian persecution and stuff like that. Like, fascinating trilogy, and it's actually really well written. So
I have the first one. I haven't written it yet.
Taylor Marshall.
You haven't written it yet?
I mean, read. I have the first one. I haven't read it yet.
Yeah. It's a big shout out there. That's a great series.
Yeah.
And one of the guys that we featured in season 1, Philip Campbell. Philip Campbell's also a fantasy writer as well. He's got a book. I can't remember the title. He gave it to me. I'll ensure that I find out and put it in the show notes.
Yeah.
But yeah, he's a fantastic author too, and he does history. books as well for Tan and a bunch of stuff like that. But yeah, I mean, having real Catholic people doing, you know, these kind of fantasy novels is kind of cool. So we should definitely support them.
Yeah, we have imaginations too, but you know, we want to engage them in ways that encourage us to be virtuous, to be good people, to make good decisions. You know,
right? And that should be the end
these
goal,
are things.
right?
Pardon me.
That should be the end goal.
Yeah,
Making us better people.
yeah.
And games like that are things that you can, you know, give to your teens or play with them, like, and play yourself if you're, and, you know, form people in virtue.
Yeah. I really want to talk about the Hallows campaign again.
What about it?
Well,
Tell us
like,
more about Hallows and how awesome it is.
Yeah, like when I started writing the Hallows campaign, I totally intended for there to be characters that were based off of saints. That those characters would be those that were graced with, you know, powers or strengths or whatnot, and that Mike's character, Lavrinus, would encounter. And Lavrinus had kind of a tragic backstory, and he would encounter things that were, you know, bad, or tried to force him to not do bad things, but to really kind of punch him in the teeth and remind him of those things that had happened in his past with the loss of his family and, you know, the loss of everything he had. And in the end, right when he's like struck down, he's like graced with basically level 20, level 20 powers, and with the aid of, you know, some other minor characters, he manages to defeat the big bad evil guy.
Classic D&D storytelling stuff.
Yeah. But obviously I did, like, you know.
It sounds really tropey when you try to describe it, but like, it was so good to play.
It was so good. It was so good.
Yeah.
Like, yeah. It was just the best.
I think something needs to be said too about the importance of adventure for friends. Because I think, honestly, like, friendship doesn't really take root until you adventure and experience something together, and you maybe encounter an obstacle that you have to overcome together. You know, when I think about 2000
Bilbo Baggins.
and when was it, 2010? Yeah, 2010.
Okay.
I know where he's going with this.
Oh, yeah.
Going down to Washington, D.C. and, you know, getting engaged to Julie. And Mike and our friend Maggie were with us, and, you know, we're driving home and our car dies in the middle of Maryland. You know? I honestly think that us going through that experience strengthened our friendship, you know? And, you know, whether you can go through that kind of real life adventure, you know, I think that's of vital importance. But I think even just kind of going through these fake adventures also builds a friendship and helps you to know better your friends in a way too, because you can kind of understand their personalities more, how they deal with conflict, how they deal with, you know, I don't know, like you get to see how strong of an actor they are.
Or how weak.
Or how weak.
Speaking from personal experience.
You get to kind of invoke this inner child, you know, like there's something so sweet and wonderful and perfect about, you know, a little boy that runs outside wielding his cardboard sword, you know, fighting those imaginary dragons, or, you know, the girl that pretends to be a princess. Pardon me?
Oh wait, no, that's Imagine Dragons. Never mind.
Like,
we know all about girls who are princesses.
We do. She whines so much more than a good princess should, though.
I'm reminded of that story from Father Chris, where Father Chris Petrashko, he'll never listen to this podcast. He was telling two friends of ours, he was like, "You guys are princesses, and I don't mean the good kind."
But it's important. It's important to have fun.
Yeah.
Like, you know, I'm like grinning ear to ear because I'm like, I'm talking about D&D with my friends. This is so fun. Yeah, I do want to, say that so often we find ourselves to be hobbits, so much set in our little hobbit holes. And I remember watching the scene from The Hobbit, not that I really love it, but where Bilbo finally decides to go on the adventure. I'm going on an adventure. He's running down the path and he's waving his paper and he's all excited that he's doing something different and bold and fun. And in the end, helps bring down the dragon. Sometimes we need a Gandalf to come knocking on a door saying, "Would you like to play D&D? Just kidding. It's me. It's Brooke. Come play D&D."
That is pretty much how it happened. So
yeah, I basically tied y'all up, threw you in my trunk, and said, "You got to play D&D with me. It's gonna be great." Sorry, not so.
That's the thing, though. Like you bring up a really important point that sometimes you just need somebody to go on an adventure with you too.
Yeah.
To encourage you in that. But I don't think, I think beyond that too. Like, some marriages don't have spouses that are good at playing together. It's just the reality of some marriages. But if that's the case, if you don't have a spouse that's willing to do that kind of thing, and even if Dungeons and Dragons is not your jam,
find your jam.
Find something. Find an adventure that you can go on. And find people to do it with you. And the thing is, the faith itself is an adventure.
Yeah.
Agreed.
So, obviously find people to do that with you. So that you can talk about.
Yeah, first and foremost.
Yeah.
Like that's how God teaches us. Yeah. Really, when it comes down to it, like, I'm looking right now at, we've got the new vinyl by Towers sitting on our mantle on top of our fireplace, and the picture on it is maybe, I think, their son wrapped in a towel, and he's at the beach, Even in just doing stuff like that, like going, finding a different beach to go to, or just doing these different things that could be your adventure, even for the day, And
the big thing about the big thing about adventure is invoking that feeling of wonder,
exactly,
and awe and excitement, and it literally may be finding an adventure in watching your kids race hobby horses up and down the hallway. That's happened to me.
That's a good adventure.
It's a great adventure. Watching your kids have adventures is adventurous.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But it's so important to of course, let them happen to us, but to go and seek them. Like, they're not always just going to fall into our lap.
Yeah. Finding them in everyday life.
Yeah. Nothing exciting ever happens to me. Well, you just stay at home and do nothing.
Yeah. Go back to that Chesterton quote, right? Like, everything in life can be seen with that kind of wonder, like the river flowing with gold.
Yeah. if you find you're not in wonder in some point of your faith journey, seek it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And maybe we can tie it back into our traditional side of things. I think when we talk about the traditional Latin Mass and how it's impacted our own faith, I would say that it is that very point of awe and wonder,
Mm-hmm.
in the presence of God that
Yep.
draws us to a deeper commitment and love for the Mass of the ages.
Mm-hmm.
It's
Yeah,
veiled
so
in
much that.
mystery.
It feels like a liturgy that real heroes would go to,
Because that's the liturgy that saints attended.
that treats us like we are on an adventure in the faith,
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Truth.
and arms us for that adventure.
Truth.
Cool.
Yeah.
That's what I call a podcast.
I would like to say you guys are great. And I'm really
Thanks.
glad that we're friends, that we've had the opportunity to go on adventures together. I want all of our listeners to hear this, because
Yeah.
I mean, you guys have been there through a lot, and we're about to encounter, for at least for Julie and I,
Another adventure.
another big adventure.
Yeah.
And you guys are going to be there for that too. So,
Yeah.
well, if you're not, we're tying you up, putting you in our car, and bringing you along. So,
Yeah.
I'm gonna be in the hospital room the whole time. You can do it, Julie. And I'll be saying it in my typical Brooke way, Julie.
Yeah. Be like, will you bring me a
With your tongue
sandwich
sticking
after?
out.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Brooke, you're the best. I'm gonna name my kid after you.
tell them what you want the baby's name to be.
Oh, Brooke Noel. And if it's a boy, Athanasius Wenceslaus Hilarious
Noel.
Pinnacle.
I don't get the Brooke Noel thing, because Brooke normally doesn't have an L.
Wait, what?
I
It
get
hurts
it.
so
Oh
much.
my gosh.
It hurts so. No. The joke about Brooke Noel is like Angela from The Office always refers to her imaginary self as Noelle when she's talking about her friend, because that's her middle name is Noelle. So I just always kind of found it a little bit funny.
Yeah.
So you could just call her Brooke Pinnaker.
Also, because it'll be a Christmassy
Christmassy.
time baby.
Yeah.
It's going to be a boy, though, so it'll be Brock.
Brock.
Horrible name. What's your name? Brock Pinnaker. Congratulations, it's a chicken.
There's
This
some
is just
listener
getting
out
weird.
there named Brock that's so offended right now.
Yeah.
It's like,
You know
thought-
what, Brock? You're okay. Stone Pokemon are just fine.
like Brock sounds like Brock.
Oh, that's where she gets the chicken
Oh,
from.
that's so painful, Brooke.
It is.
Oh, that's terrible.
In that case, she'd say it's Brock
David.
Nashville chicken.
Chicken.
Oh.
Oh.
Go on adventures with your friends.
Yeah.
Yeah. Find a buddy, go on an adventure, take a picture,
Go to
share
co-
it with us.
Yeah.
Yes, that sounds amazing. This week, make a point in going on an adventure to the library, maybe
To
to get ice
Costco?
cream. Costco?
Yeah,
Girl?
ice cream. Mm-hmm.
Costco?
Dairy Queen.
Yeah.
Dairy Queen, sure.
The park,
Mass.
Yeah.
Mass, on a hike, go on a hike, or just sit in your backyard and enjoy nature. Leave your phone somewhere else and just enjoy.
I'll adventure to the couch and snuggle with the dogs.
Take a picture of an email that you send to us at theologyofthebuddy@gmail.com requesting to join one of our D&D campaigns.
Yeah.
Or if you need ideas or you have more questions about Hallows, that'd be so cool. It's still a work in progress, but it's so fun. It's so fun. I'm so sorry.
Yeah.
No, I'm not.
I'm so sorry.
I'm dead.
I'm dad.
Oh gosh. See, I knew it. That's why I said you should
Mike and I get to
tattoo
say
that on your
together.
arm. Hi, blank.
Yeah.
I'm dad.
Long distance high five.
Yeah.
If I were to get a tattoo, by the way, I've told you this joke or this story before, but I would just have the words "your name" tattooed on my butt, so that I could go into bars and talk to drunk people and say, "I'll bet you $10 I've
It's a
got your
joke,
name
though.
tattooed on my butt." And then they're like, "Oh yeah, proof it." And I'm just drop my drawers. And there you
Makes
go.
so much money.
Yeah, you make so much money.
Oh, man.
Well, yeah.
We once were podcasting, and then it turned out we were just talking.
Yep.
That's the beauty of it.
Guess that's
Get
it
to know
for that.
us. Get to know us.
Stay tratty. Who wants that this time? Mike doesn't do stay tratty. It's his turn.
So what's going on in the next podcast? Do we have anything planned?
Brooke's interview?
Are we doing them
Oh,
Trads at a metal festival?
Yeah, Trads in a Metal Festival is being recorded on the 24th.
so
On my birthday.
The only thing,
Mike, let's give
more-
them a hint as to what we're really talking about. Don't give them all the
We
juice.
wanted to find something more offensive to trad sensibilities than Dungeons and Dragons. That's next week.
Yeah.
This episode is going to be dedicated to Aaron.
Yep. All those that hate
maybe
things that are
Justin.
good.
It's the entire podcast will be syncopated.
Uh-oh.
You gotta cut that out.
Actually, it's dedicated to the guy in PF Chang's.
Yeah,
My hero. Speaking of heroes, that guy is a hero.
That is amazing.
I love that guy.
Oh, yeah. You are not going to want to miss it next week. We are going to tell a story about a true hero. You think Alexander Shugul was a hero for knocking the Pachamamas off the
You
bridge
think
into the
Samwise Gamgee was a real hero? He was. But this guy was also a hero.
I can't wait to talk about this, man. It's going to be fun. So it's just going to be Mike and I on the next one. Yeah. So the girls can, I don't know, snuggle and drink hot cocoa and do
Cute.
something else. I don't know.
I don't know where I'll be
Relax.
by that point. We'll see.
Yeah, hopefully we haven't given birth at that point.
And hopefully I won't be in the hospital.
Yeah.
We don't know yet. We'll find out Thursday what the doctor says this time again.
Yeah. Pray for Julie. There's a chance she might go preterm.
Yep.
Our baby is going to be 32 weeks on Monday. So
Yeah.
we don't really want them to come preterm.
No.
So,
But you know how much control you have over those things. You don't.
Yeah.
So.
awesome. All right. Well, Brooke, send us off.
Thank you so much for listening to our podcast. And remember, above all things, stay chatty.
Awesome.
Thanks so much for listening to today's podcast. How do you feel about Dungeons and Dragons? Would you ever play? Have you ever played before? Would you let Brooke be your dungeon master? Message us on Facebook or DM on Instagram at Theology of the Buddy. Find us on Twitter at TradFriends or email us at theologyofthebuddy@gmail.com. You can also send us a voicemail via Facebook Messenger. If you like what you heard today, please consider subscribing to us on iTunes, Spotify, Stitcher, Google Play, or wherever you listen to great podcasts. Would you also please consider rating and reviewing us on iTunes? We'd greatly appreciate it as it helps us to get noticed within the larger podcast community. Next week, Mike and Chris will be getting into a super spicy topic that is widely debated among Catholics, particularly in traditional circles. Make sure you are subscribed so you can listen as soon as the episode is out. We'll save you a seat at the table. New episodes are released every Wednesday, so until then, stay tratty.